Here we go. Humanities 101 and NACHOS reminds you that you are enough. Now we join Dr. Dutch with the Neuro-Affirming Conversation Hour for outreach and support.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Hello, Nacho Knotson. Happy National Coffee Day. Get my cup here. There you go. Just like a freaking commercial. Today is September 29th, and we pause to honor a simple but beloved ritual, the warm, comforting cup of a coffee. In the U.S. and Canada, this day is set aside to celebrate all things coffee, its rich aromas, deep flavors, the camaraderie it invites, and yes, even its gentle nudge to wake us up. But coffee is more than just a drink. It's a story that stretches back centuries across continents, cultures, and human connections. Anthropologists, and historians trace the origins of coffee to the Ethiopian highlands, where legend tells us that a goat herd named Kaldi noticed that his goats were leaping with unusual energy after eating these bright red berries from a certain shrub. Curious, he tried them himself, and soon word spread of this plant's invigorating power. From Ethiopia, coffee traveled to the Arabian Peninsula, where it was first roasted and brewed into a dark, rich drink we recognize today. In 15th century Yemen, Sufi mystics embraced coffee as a tool for focus and spiritual devotion during long nights of prayer. By the 16th century, coffee houses flourished in cities like Cairo, Istanbul, and Mecca, and these places became spaces of conversation, commerce, and community. European ports soon welcomed the bean, and from there, coffee became a global companion, fueling revolutions, artistic movements, and fueling everyday lives. So as we lift our mugs today, we are not only savoring a beverage, but participating in a centuries-long human story of discovery, ritual, and connection. Rituals like coffee are more than habits. They're anchors. Each morning, when we reach for a cup, we're not just waking up our bodies, we're establishing a rhythm. And this rhythm is what our PB&J ethic reminds us to cherish: predictability, balance, joy. The predictability of a warm mug, it greets us at the same time each day, and it can soothe our nervous system. The balance comes in the choosing to pause, to sip slowly, and to give ourselves presence amid the rush. And the joy, well, that often bubbles up in the simplest things: the aroma, the first taste, the quiet moment that feels like ours alone. Coffee is a small thing, but it teaches us something profound. Life's biggest grounding forces are often tucked into the tiniest of rituals: a shared pot with a friend, a quiet hum of a cafe, or even the solitary act of pouring cream into your own dark liquid. These small acts weave meaning into our lives. They weave meaning into our days. They remind us that balance isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in little practices that sustain us over time. T.S. Eliot, the famous poet, once wrote, "I have measured out my life with coffee spoons." It's a line that captures both the humor and the honesty of how our lives unfold, not always in sweeping cinematic moments, but in the small, repeated gestures that quietly add up. A spoonful of sugar here, a dash of cream there. The humble details become the true markers of our time. And yet there's the wisdom, and there's wisdom in recognizing this. To measure life with coffee spoons is not to diminish it, but to honor the truth that the everyday is where life actually happens. In curiosity, in repetition, in the rituals that we craft, the rituals that we discover ourselves. Coffee spoons, like so many little tools, are symbols of how ordinary moments accumulate into extraordinary lives. Each scoop and sip is a reminder that life isn't only about milestones, but about the countless in-between spaces. And those spaces, they're worth noticing, they're worth cherishing, and they're worth measuring. And here's the deeper gift of rituals. They do more than soothe. They prepare us. Every time we ground ourselves in something steady and familiar, we create the safety needed to step toward the unknown. Predictability, balance, and joy are not cages, they're launch pads. They give us the footing we need to take the leap into curiosity. Because curiosity is fragile. We only get one true chance with it. The first time we encounter something new, our minds are open, receptive, alive with possibility. But if we hesitate too long, our brains begin to resist. They pull back into the familiar. They retreat into the old grooves of habit. To be curious is to catch the spark at the very moment it appears, before fear and doubt snuff it out. That's why ritual matters. They don't limit curiosity, they protect it. By grounding us, they free us. They whisper, "You are safe enough to explore. You are steady enough to change. You are rooted enough to grow." So when the wave of life comes, as it always does, curiosity is what allows us to ride it rather than be swept under by it. To notice its colors, to marvel at its height, to feel its power with awe instead of fear. Curiosity is not about having all the answers. It's about saying yes to the mystery, saying yes to the journey, yes to the chance that the unknown might bring us to a greater wholeness than we've ever imagined. And in this way, even something as simple as a coffee spoon becomes a kind of compassion. It points us towards wonder that awaits when we stay open, stay steady, and stay ready to ride the wave. Rituals, like our beloved coffee spoon moments, are the calm inlet before the ocean swell. They ground us. They center us. And in that centering, we gain the courage to let our attention roam. In that space, curiosity becomes possible. Without that grounding, when life tosses a swell of change or uncertainty, we might cling too tightly to what's familiar, letting fear drown out wonder. But with a rhythm beneath our feet, we can lean into life's shifts with openness instead of retreat. Which brings us to a new story, one that invites us to rewrite the history books in our minds, and not with grand epics only, but with the deep curiosities beneath them. A recent piece of historical research reminds us how a long-forgotten figure in English history is being pulled back into view, and how an act of rediscovery is in of itself an act of curiosity. And this story centers on Æthelstan, who was crowned in 925 AD or CE and is now being reconsidered the first true king of England. During his reign, he united territories, reformed laws, and supported both learning and faith for centuries. Later monarchs and events overshadows his legacy, but historians looking closely at the evidence now argue that he was the one who truly laid the foundations of the English kingdom. In plain terms, Æthelstan worked to consolidate power not just through battles, but through charters, law codes, and careful weaving together of disparate religions or regions. He cultivated consistency in governance, expanded oversight, and brought learned figures into his court. He made scholarship a central part of his reign. So why does this matter? Because it shifts how we see the arc of history. It reminds us what is visible in our textbooks is only part of the story, the tip of the iceberg. It teaches us that power is not only exercised in wars, but in ideas, in laws, in culture, in who controls history. It shows us that memory especially cultural memory, is malleable. And that curiosity, the willingness to look again, to go back to the story that's been told a million times, to notice what was overlooked, that's what keeps our understanding alive. It's what keeps our curiosity possible. And this is where the neurodivergent lens comes in. For so many of us, our stories have been edited, erased, and overshadowed by louder narratives. Our strengths, our creativity, and our ways of being have often been misinterpreted or left out of the official record. Just like Æthelstan's overlooked reign, our contributions don't disappear. They wait for someone curious enough to notice them, affirm them, and bring them into light. Curiosity, when paired with compassion, allows us to rewrite the stories we've been told about ourselves and to honor the truths that were always there. This is where curiosity is itself, in and of itself, self-care. For neurodivergent people, being curious about our own rhythms, our own needs, our own ways of thriving, it's an act of affirmation. It's how we resist the temptation to retreat into what's been prescribed for us and instead move toward what is actually sustaining for us. When we give ourselves permission to be curious about new strategies, new environments, or new supports, we're not being frivolous. We're being brave. And this connects deeply to our NACHOS themes of self-care, self-affirmation, and growth. Because when we allow ourselves to be curious, when we lean into what we don't know, when we let the wave carry us into a new inquiry, we affirm our capacity to change, to learn, and to evolve. We remind ourselves that growth isn't about becoming normal or acceptable by someone else's standards, but about uncovering the fullness of who we already are. To stand between ritual and curiosity is to stand between the shores of being and the shores of becoming. Ritual holds us. Curiosity moves us. And together they offer a way to chart a life that is both stable and adventurous, both rooted and exploratory. A life where neurodivergent voices like forgotten kings are finally recognized as central to the story. And yet here's the paradox. So often, our self-care is not discovered but dictated. Doctors, teachers, family, workplaces, even well-meaning friends, they hand us lists of what we should be doing, how we ought to recharge, what will supposedly fix us. And when care feels like a demand instead of a choice, many of us push back. Sometimes we resist so strongly that we hurt ourselves in the process, shutting down relationships or rejecting supports that might actually help. For those of us who live with demand avoidance, some called pathological demand avoidance, though many of us prefer less clinical, more compassionate language, this push and pull can feel especially intense. A suggestion of rest feels like a command. An invitation to care feels like a burden. But here's the truth. We must remember, our resistance is not a sign that we are unworthy or incapable of love. It simply is a part of how our nervous system is wired. And when we know that, we can make a different choice. Self-care doesn't have to be an obligation forced upon us. It can be a gift that we give ourselves. Our distrust of others' prescriptions, they don't have to harden us into distrusting ourselves. We can love ourselves enough to find rituals and rhythms that feel authentic to us. We can honor our need for autonomy while also honoring our need for rest, joy, and community. And that's the balance. That's the PB&J way. And it allows us to grow without abandoning ourselves. And sometimes the things that shape our lives the most are the ones so ordinary we hardly notice them. We think of stress as something in our heads, worries, deadlines, social pressures. But new research reminds us that the body keeps its own quiet score. And even something as simple as not drinking enough water can make the waves of stress crash harder. Now, this particular study I'm mentioning, carried out by researchers in the UK and Germany, asked participants to go through a stressful social task while their bodies were carefully monitored. Half the group typically drank less than 1.5 liters of water per day, while the others were considered well hydrated. Outwardly, both groups looked and felt about the same. Their heart rates went up, they reported feeling nervous, but on the inside, the difference was striking. In the underhydrated group, cortisol, our friend and evil enemy, the body's stress hormone, it spiked more than 50% higher than those who had enough water. And that means dehydration didn't change how anxious they felt, but it did change how much stress their bodies had to carry. So that matters because it shows us how easy it is to underestimate the basics. We often treat hydration as an afterthought, something we'll get around to. But here the science is clear. Our bodies handle stress better when we give them the simple fuel they need. A glass of water may not erase the hard things in life, but it can strengthen us to meet them, to sustain against them, to survive in spite of them. And for neurodivergent folks, this is especially important. Many of us live with nervous systems that are already on high alert, processing sensory load, social cues, and the constant hum of executive demands. If dehydration amplifies stress hormones, then the weight becomes even heavier, and that leaves us less room for joy, curiosity, and connection. And yet, because self-care so often comes to us as orders, drink more water, take a break, do it this way, it's natural to push back. Sometimes that resistance is strong enough to make us reject even the things that might help. But here's the shift. Hydration doesn't have to be about obeying someone else's command. It can be about choosing ourselves. We can claim the power to drink water not because it's demanded, but because we love ourselves enough to do so. We can make it a ritual, not a rule, a quiet, steady act of care that says, I matter. My body matters. My well-being matters. My future matters. So much of life feels out of control, but this is one place where we have the power to change something for the better. A spoonful of coffee, a sip of water, these small rituals remind us that we are not powerless. We are not broken. We're capable of nurturing ourselves in ways that ripple outward towards balance, towards curiosity, and towards joy. But as much as we do have the power to make small choices for ourselves, like sipping water or honoring rhythms, we also need to pause and acknowledge something important. Not everything that weighs on us is ours to carry. Sometimes misinformation, cultural myths, or plain ignorance get passed down as if they were truth, and we end up absorbing the guilt. We're told our struggles are a result of laziness, lack of discipline, or some personal failure, when in reality, the root lies elsewhere. For neurodivergent folks especially, this message can cut deep. Those doctors, teachers, and even family members that we mentioned before may frame our challenges as character flaws. But what if the issue is not a flaw at all? What if it's a product of systems that aren't built to include us, or even hidden biological factors like microbacteria that subtly change brain chemistry, influencing mood, cognition, and behavior? In those moments, self-responsibility becomes twisted into self-blame, and we lose sight of the fact that much of what shapes our lives is not a personal shortcoming, but the result of forces beyond our control. All of us carry stories about our health, our struggles, and our weaknesses. Sometimes those stories come from judgment, from doctors, from culture, from shame, insisting that faults lie within us, that we simply aren't trying hard enough, doing well enough, or being good enough. But what if some of that weight we feel is not ours to bear? That question becomes more pressing in light of new study from the Washington State University. In this work led by PhD candidate Erica English in collaboration with Regents Professor James Kruger, researchers found that a bacteria molecule in the brain that's naturally present fluctuates with sleep cycles. This challenges the old view that sleep is purely driven by neurons. Instead, it hints that the microbiome and the microbiome of our brain and our body, they're talking to one another in ways that we're only beginning to understand. In these experiments, the team measured these levels in different areas of the brain at various times of the day and after periods of sleep disruption. They discovered that these levels rose and fell depending on both time and sleep history, and that the gene connected to these bacteria shifted their activity with sleep loss. In other words, our sleep, our stress, and even our moods may not be entirely ours. They are woven together with microbial whispers we can't consciously control. This brings us back to balance. For so many of us, especially in neurodivergent communities, balance feels elusive. We're told to control everything: emotions, productivity, energy, sleep. And when balance slips, we are told that it's our fault. But this research suggests something different. That balance is not about perfect control. It's about relationship, give and take. Just as the brain and the microbiome are in constant dialogue, so too are our rituals, our bodies, and our choices. Balance isn't a straight line we achieve once and for all. It's an ongoing dance between what we can influence and, honestly, what we must accept. And here's the empowering part. We do have a role to play in this dance. We may not be able to control these molecules in our brain, but we can choose how to respond to that knowledge. We can shift from blame to curiosity. We can create rituals that support our bodies, hydration, rest, movement, connection, not as obligations imposed by others, but as acts of love for ourselves. And in that shift, balance stops being another demand to meet and becomes a way of honoring the conversation already happening within us. To live in balance, then, is not to chase perfection. It's to embrace the truth that we're complex, interconnected beings carrying unseen worlds within inside us. Balance comes when we stop fighting those worlds and start caring for them gently, steadily, and with compassion. Riding that wave a bit further, we come to a study that reminds us sometimes the distress we feel is not just psychological. It's woven into the very rules of society, into politics, and into economics, into how time itself is structured. And those are not things that we made, yet they shape us deeply. Now, a recent Stanford-led study, with lead author Laura Weed and senior author Jamie Zeitzer, modeled how the twice-a-year clock changes, the shifts into daylight savings time and back, impose a circadian burden on people. Their work compared what would happen under three policies: permanent standard time, permanent daylight savings time, or the status quo of biannual shifting. The results were stark. The researchers estimated that keeping the permanent standard time could prevent around 300,000 strokes a year and reduce obesity in millions of people. In short, they argue, fiddling with time doesn't just irritate our schedules. It takes measurable tolls on our health. This study hits hard because it shows how large systems, politics, economics, laws, are playing wizard with time. They decide which hour is morning, which is light, which is night. And those choices ripple down through our bodies, influencing our rhythms, our metabolism, and even our risk for stroke. In effect, these systemic decisions can turn what should be our internal balance into an uphill battle. And when we live in that tension, it's easy and deeply unfair for society to whisper, "It's your fault. It's your fault you're not thriving." To say you need better sleep hygiene, more discipline, more self-regulation, as if your biology, your context, and the very clock you're forced to follow aren't part of the equation, It's ludicrous. But this research helps us reclaim a piece of clarity. Some of the distress is not a deficit in you. It's a function of how society bends time and how policies force stress into our bodies, how structural design offloads onto individual resilience. Yet that revelation does not render us helpless. If we can see the systems, we can also find small ways to live with them more compassionately. We can tend to what we can tend: rituals of sleep, light exposure, rest, boundaries around work and rest, not because someone mandated them, but because we know our system is buffered by invisible pressures. We can refuse to internalize blame for what was engineered into the rhythms of our world. So let this be a turning point. We hold both truths: that systems shape us and that we still have meaningful agency. We stop carrying guilt for what we did not design and instead orient towards what we can nurture, protect, and transform in our own lives. And from there, we ride forward with curiosity, with steadiness, with the quiet power of choosing ourselves even in unjust conditions. When we step back, a theme begins to rise from the threads of all these stories. Whether it was the comfort of coffee spoons, the quiet role of hydration in stress, bacterial whispers shaping our sleep, or an overlooked English king stitching together a nation. Each of these stories is telling us the same thing: that predictability, balance, and joy are not optional add-ons to life. They're the very ground we walk on. They're what holds us steady while forces larger than us, biology, politics, economics, culture, swirl around. Coffee gives us predictability, the small act of return day after day that says you are here, you are alive, and you belong to this moment. Sleep and its microbial dance reminds us that balance isn't about conquering or controlling every variable. It's about honoring the relationships inside our bodies and letting them work with us, not against us. Æthelstan, hidden for centuries, reminds us of joy's deep work, that curiosity can resurrect forgotten truths, that what once was silenced can still be heard, and that our stories matter even when others try to erase them. But if we stop here, we miss the larger call, because the work of being human is not just to survive these forces, but to live, to lean into curiosity, to honor the small rituals, to love ourselves fiercely enough to resist apathy. Every system we've named, whether it be bacteria, politics, or a history book, tries in its own way to shape the story of who we are. And there's always a quiet temptation to give in, to believe the lie that says you don't matter, you can't change it, your voice is too small. That is the obstinate apathy of the world. And it's perhaps the greatest danger we face. Because when we believe it, when we stop being curious, when we stop asking, we stop imagining. We surrender the most radical thing we have: our voice, our capacity to see, and our capacity to tell a different story. The work of living is to resist that surrender. It's to ride the wave of curiosity even when fear tells us to retreat. It is to challenge the myth that our lives are measured only in milestones and to instead honor the coffee spoons and the water glasses, the tiny acts that ripple outward into transformation. And it is to demand balance not because anyone gave us permission, but because we know that we deserve it. And it's to choose joy. Joy is defiance. Joy is resistance. Joy is belonging. Joy is the clearest proof that we are still here and that we're still human. This is the larger work we do as humans, to live, to be curious, to keep asking questions of ourselves and of the world, to say no to silence, no to apathy, no to the idea that we cannot change, to embrace instead the steady truth that our voices matter, our choices matter, and our lives, in their complexity and beauty, are always worth living. Now, this week, I invite you to pause and reflect. What small ritual in your life, a sip of coffee, a glass of water, a quiet pause, a walk outside, what small ritual helps you find balance and prepares you to stay curious in the face of life's challenges? I want you to share this with us in the chat, not as a prescription for anyone else, but as a reminder that your rhythms, your voice, and your way of caring for yourself matter. Now, as always, Nacho Knots, if today's conversation spoke to you, I'd love for you to keep the ripple going. Follow, share, and invite others into this space of curiosity and care. Your support, whether through listening, spreading the word, or giving, is what allows us to keep building this community together. And a quick update. The Michigan Disability Empowerment Conference is almost sold out. We have 5 tickets left. If you've been hoping to join us in Dearborn this October, I'm so sorry if you're not able to attend due to capacity, but take heart. The next conference is already being whispered into the ears across mid-Michigan. The work is not stopping, it's growing. It's widening. It's opening doors we haven't even stepped through yet. In fact, I'll be carrying this message forward in Flint at Kettering University this November, and then all the way to Yale again this December. Each time I speak, I carry you with me. This community, this ethic of care, this refusal to let apathy or silence define our lives. So stay tuned, stay curious, and most of all, stay connected, because your voice, your presence, and your joy are what make this movement real. And before we close today, I want to leave you with affirmations, not just words, but reminders, stitched from the stories we've carried together. Coffee taught us that the smallest rituals can steady us. Hydration showed us that our bodies deserve gentleness, not neglect. An uncredited king reminded us that forgotten stories, like forgotten people, are still full of power. Bacteria in the brain and politics on the clock reminded us that not every burden is ours to bear. And through it all, curiosity has been our constant, the wave that refuses to let us give up. So let these truths sink in. Your rituals matter. That morning cup, that glass of water, that pause to breathe, they're not trivial. They're anchors. They're love notes to your nervous system saying, you are safe. You're not to blame. Not for what biology whispered, not for what politics imposed, not for what others misunderstood. Your worth has never been measured in compliance. Your story is not lost, even if it has been ignored, dismissed, or rewritten by others. Like Æthelstan, your story is waiting to be reclaimed, and it is powerful beyond measure. Your curiosity is sacred. Every time you ask, you wonder, or resist the voice of apathy, you're doing the radical work of being alive. You're proof that possibility still exists. Your joy is resistance. Every laugh, every spark, every moment of delight is a declaration. I am still here, and I will not be silenced. Nacho Knots, never forget. You are more than enough. You are worthy of care, worthy of balance, and worthy of joy. Worthy of the work of living, the messy, beautiful, courageous work of being human. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present, being curious, and being unafraid to love yourself in a world that tries to tell you not to. So as we step back from coffee spoons and kings, from microbes and midnight clocks, remember this. The world will always try to tell you that you are small, that you don't matter, that you cannot change what has already been written. But the truth is fiercer than this. You are the story. You are the ritual, the balance, the curiosity, the joy. You carry within you the power to rewrite not only the history books, but the book of your own life. So hold fast to your anchors, stay open to the wave of wonder, and never forget, your voice is not just enough, it is necessary.